Well, hello. This morning, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Microschools Network and our origin story. So I wanted to put some faces to the names. My name is Whitney Retzer, and this is my colleague, Siri Fiske.
Hi.
So Siri's the brains behind the Microschool Network. She was one of the first people to start a microschool around the world. And we've got so many different things that we're working on. So Siri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I sort of came into the microschool world through doing research on what the best practices are for teaching and learning. And in 2016, when I started MISA Microschool in Washington, D.C., um, just looking around at the educational landscape and what was happening. And at that time, people really weren't using the internet as much as you think they would be in 2016. And looking at the research on how people learn and specifically how children learn, one of the things that I thought was striking was all the research on motivation. And that research essentially said what we all know, sort of common sense, is that people are more motivated to learn when they know why they're learning what they're learning or they find it intrinsically interesting. And one of the things that I was seeing across all sort of big schools, even schools that had wonderful programs and great classes, was kids weren't necessarily motivated. They didn't really understand why they needed to learn algebra or what the purpose of certain things was. And so being able to customize for each student and make the learning really unique to them or pique their interest in some way using resources on the internet, having teachers really be able to say I have 6 students that are all need to learn this one lesson, and if I go on the internet I can find customized lessons. So that's back in 2016. And then fast forward now, almost 10 years later, everybody's doing that. But at that point, that there weren't a lot of environments. There was online schools starting or existing, but they were using the same model as in-person schools, just delivering it very one way. And so the idea was to sort of lessen the load of teachers and really start to customize. So in my mind, that sort of was the beginning of the micro school sort of movement, was this
Yeah.
move into really taking advantage of technology, and not having the tech necessarily teach the kids, but using resources and lesson plans and teacher pay teacher sort of things to customize for each student. So that's
Yeah,
sort
it
of how
makes
I
it
got into it.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there was always Montessori models and small schools around, but you're right, it was really a great time in the world where all kinds of resources and technology started to enable that
Yeah.
customization. Were
Yeah.
you always in education, or had you done different things prior to that before you started
Um,
MISA in 2016?
so before that, I mean, early on, I was in anthropology, and worked in East Africa, and but then when my own children were in public schools in California, I saw a real need for I don't know, sort of adding to the curriculum that they had. And part there was funding, and there wasn't art or music or really anything sort of extra in the public schools. And so I started to design curriculum to help out at that school that my children went to. And then I just really enjoyed it and really sort of discovered I had a knack for designing curriculum and designing programs and working with teachers. And so um, yeah, so one thing led to another, and I started working in California, designing music and arts programs for public schools, and then worked at an independent school that got me into designing programs. And I helped design um, launch a school in Korea, and then ended up in DC and started MISA. So,
That independent school in Korea is doing pretty well these days, isn't it? That was how many
yes.
years ago did you start that? Was it almost 20 years ago?
It's probably, I think I want to say like 15 years ago,
Okay.
maybe 15, maybe 20 years ago now. Yeah, they're doing great. Very large independent school, doing lots of really fun, innovative things, and very competitive to get into now, in Korea. So yeah, it's doing great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm a little bit more from the international background side of things as well, in terms of, gosh, how many countries have I worked in? I think 9 countries, and lots of different international schools, different settings, small settings, big settings, the huge international school, the IB, American, British curriculum, um, both wearing an educator hat and then also doing marketing and admissions. And so a lot of different backgrounds there. And so I think it's just so exciting to see a real renaissance in the education world. It's micro schools aren't just happening in the US or North America. They're coming up everywhere, which we've been so excited to see.
Yeah.
And for different reasons too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if on this little episode or another one we'll start to talk about what is a micro school, but I think right now that's a really broad term. I think it
Yep.
means different things to different people, but I think you're right. I think it's just seeing the different spaces and the different places around the world where a real people are really sort of the pendulum is swinging from big schools where you get a lot of I don't know, a lot more activities because you have a lot more resources because you have bigger numbers, but to really smaller schools where students are being seen, they're getting individual attention and they're working on, smaller scale. So it's a little bit deeper and a little bit, more personalized, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this journey of both of us up to now, I know launching NISA school was really a challenge for you, especially at the time. And that was kind of the impetus for starting the Microschools Network, for starting microschools.com, right? What's the origin story there?
I mean, well, you were there with me, so you
Right.
know. So I mean, I think the origin was that before the pandemic, when I was looking around at all that what was happening, and I called our school a micro school because I'd read something that was starting to call this sort of model of schooling micro school. But there weren't other schools calling themselves that. But I think at that time it meant something very specific to me, and I was seeing that happening all over the place. And I think what you and I started to talk about was how hard it was to do that. When, in 2016, when you Googled how do you start a school, there was literally no hits, there was nothing. Or how to start a school in a state, and there was nothing. And now you do that, and you're going to get thousands of people that'll help you, resources, and all sorts of stuff. But
Models you can buy,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Curriculum, everything.
school in a box, packages, like chains, I guess, chains of different kinds of, academies and stuff. But anyhow, in 2016, there was none of that. And so it was really hard to figure out like what are the rules and regulations. You'd call the state or the city and find what do I need to do to have a school? And nobody sort of knew. They knew what they need to inspect for, but they couldn't say you're required to have a water fountain or anything. So it was sort of hit or miss, and it was really hard. And it was really hard to sort of figure out how to not only do that, but so, to run a small business when you hadn't done that before. And so running a small business as also a school, there's a lot of things to learn, right? About safety and risk management and insurance and all these things. And so I think originally when we were talking about it, the idea was for Microschools Network to be a place to support leaders um, but that really changed. That evolved because during the pandemic, when everybody was starting pods and trying to scrambling and starting little schools, and there was a lot going on in terms of people trying to support each other and help each other, and it just seemed like we didn't want to. I don't know if this is how you felt, Whitney, but we just didn't want to be like, here's the way to do it. Here, we're the authority on this. We wanted to be more of a resource for people. Um, and then ultimately, we really pivoted and said, what's missing and what people need is parents need a way to find the right fit schools. We were getting a lot of parents coming to our school with students who weren't a good fit, with students who needed more resources than we had, or they needed, we didn't have anybody trained on our staff to, for example, help kids with severe dyslexia. And so they wanted to come to our school, and I said, this isn't really, we don't have the best person for you here. So I think that really I don't know, that seemed to be what we needed. And so I don't know if is that how you remember it, Whitney, that we sort of pivoted at that point to try and become more of a search engine?
Yeah, yeah. I think, I think during the pandemic, you're absolutely right because all of a sudden the scrambling and things. And so we wanted to provide, we did kind of a soft launch because we said, okay, if you have a pandemic pod, if you're looking for, options for that, list on our site. Why don't you do it now? I think that was one of the reasons. And then absolutely as we kind of started to encounter questions at MISA school, but also through the site, what is a micro school? Where are micro schools? Is there one in my area? Well, then we said we really need to branch it out. And so people, parents and other people can discover all of these micro schools that are happening all around the world. And also because, I think we realize with our own experience that, you know, it's hard having a shoestring budget to be marketing. It's hard to um, be found. It's hard to create all of that awareness. And so having a site that really centralizes it and puts it all in one place for parents to discover and understand more about it, that was really important for us to be a resource for people to understand and to define what micro schools are. And like we said, the definition is really loose and it really depends who you are and where you're at. But yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also just trying to figure out where we fit in the space. And, I don't think by nature either of us is competitive at all. And so I think sort of that's I think part of our journey in the sense that, there's a lot of other organizations that can help support small schools. So I'm thinking of like in the US, you've got the National Association of Independent Schools that has a sort of small school group that they're working, that they've formed to support people. And the National Microschooling Center, which is also in the US, is just doing a great job supporting, the sort of the national movement and doing a lot of great research and really collecting some good data. And so we're just trying to figure out where we can complement the work of others. And so I think that's sort of where I sort of feel like we've landed is like, well, the international, because nobody's really talking international. So I think that's really, and it's really nice to see to sort of like open your eyes to what's happening in other parts of the world and see the patterns across the world in what people want for their children and what kinds of schools are evolving. So I think being in that international space and then also now we're starting this new course, right?
I'm
So
so excited. I can't wait for it. It's going to be
why
great.
don't why don't you talk about the course, Whitney?
Yeah, so we've got a dual certificate program that is through the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's instructional leadership certificate, and that is a super comprehensive course that's really about the mission of teaching, finding your why. It has, lots of great courses talking about leading teacher teams and kind of scaffolding a small school. But it's really about the ins and outs of teaching. And then as well, we've got our own micro school network course that's all about micro school leadership. And so with that, we really, from a comprehensive side of things, we said, well, what does it talk? What do you need to manage a business? What do you need to sustain a business? Right? Because we had everything from the financial aspects and the risk management to the marketing side to gosh, it's a really great course. And I think, especially with the micro schools network and through MISA, we kind of saw what was happening with our colleagues and what sort of training that they needed in terms of it. So we said from two different points of view, right? We said we've got lots of educators that have a great education background. They were public school educators, they were in independent schools, and now they're looking at changing their model. And so, what does that look like really on a small school basis? Because it's a lot different if you're in a big school versus in a little small school. And then also, what does it look like to run a business? How are you doing all of the risk assessment? How are you procuring insurance? How are you considering setting up your school in terms of board governance? Is it going to be for profit, nonprofit? So really walking people through this in a year course is really great. What about you? I mean, what are you excited about for the course?
I think the it's fun to, be working with Harvard on this. And I think what the courses that are from their end, I think we had a lot of choices to what this looked like with them, and they have a lot of different kinds of classes and certificates in their education department. And we chose the courses, I think, that are about teaching, really teacher leadership versus, school leadership, because in a micro school setting, it's, I think, a lot of times when the school leadership courses are really for large school districts and
Yeah.
how do you manage multiple campuses and things like that. Whereas in a
And
micro school,
administrative teams, and there's just so
yeah,
much scaffolding in those big schools that isn't really
it's not the
required
same
in micro
thing,
schools. Yeah.
right? And I think, the managing a small team where everybody's sort of on top of each other and doing everything, and and there's a lot of dynamics, but everybody wears a lot of different hats, is a little, it's harder and it's more nuanced, and it needs a different set of skills than managing, I think, a team in a very clear hierarchy with very specific roles. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is that a lot of people who've gone into launch small schools haven't necessarily had a background in education before.
That's true. Yeah, that's the other
Yeah,
side of it. Not only public school or classical educators, it's
yeah,
entrepreneurs like um, from business backgrounds looking for a different setup for their kids. Absolutely.
yeah. So I think having classes that are really, what does really good teaching look like, and how to recognize really good teaching, and how to support really good teaching is the, in some ways, the most important role of a micro school leader, is to really be the one that's helping, making sure that the teaching is the best it can be and the learning and the environment is the best it can. And so hopefully these classes will help people, and it'll take off. So we'll see.
Yeah,
Um,
100% it's going to help people because, it's not only our personal experience, it's also, we've been collaborating with other colleagues with their backgrounds, whether they're running Small Schools Coalition and they've been around for 20 years, small schools in Bermuda. So we're really trying to also have a collective approach, right, in looking at things and providing advice because we're providing asynchronous and synchronous courses. So we get to meet, we get to talk about what does the transfer of knowledge look like specific to your environment, to the environment you're thinking of building, or to the environment that you see other people struggling with. So yeah, it's going to be great. Absolutely. Well, I think it's enough for today, Siri. I'm feeling like I need a coffee.
yeah, I think we didn't do bad for our first one. What do you think?
I think so. Absolutely. Well, I'll say goodbye and stay tuned. We're gonna create some other videos. Hopefully that'll be useful for colleagues.
All right. Bye.
Bye.